still on the just released GDP figures for the fourth quarter, full year. We're going to be talking to Michael Nwakalor of Cardinal Stone about the agricultural sector and much, much more. The border closures, possibly market reactions. Michael, you are welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. All right, now, we've already gone through this with the Director General of the LCCI, right? There was a number of earlier charts, but now we want to get into a few more sectors, most notably agriculture. So we've got quarterly GDP performance here. We've got full year disparity in some of the figures. Michael, let's go through this. Let's go through it. What are we seeing here?
Okay, yeah. So I think what we're seeing really, right? So when we look at the quarterly figures, right, what we can see is that looking at Q4 and Q1 2019. The rest of the quarters haven't performed as well. And I think this has really been pretty much in line with with what we've seen since the increased incidence of banditry and herdsmen clashes, right? So historically, we've had agricultural growth at about 3.5, 3.7%. But recently, it struggled to get there. Like the best quarter in a while is Q4 19, and as you can see, that's just 3.2% approximately. And what we've seen in Q3 and Q4 is, well, it's a bit of recovery from Q2, right?
Recession period, right? I think not really, but we've grown from the recession, but that was the slowest one, okay.
Exactly, right? So from Q2, right, it was a bit down, and that's not the first time we've seen that in Q2 and Q3 18 as well. It was about 1-point-something%, so pretty low, right? So it's kind of good to see some consistency in Q3 and Q4, and I think that's in part due to the border closures that happened around that time. So I think it's some positive in terms of that, but then again, we're still a lot further out from the 3.7% that we've been doing in the last 10 years on average.
And then on an annual basis.
Yeah, so on an annual basis, right, we recovered once again a bit slightly, 2.36 compared to 2.12 last year. But, I think this just buttresses the point I was trying to make earlier. If we look at 2016 and 17, we're doing 4.1, 3.5. So, there's still a way to go to get to where we once were. But I think in terms of trying to stimulate local production, the government is going in the right direction.
Okay. All right, let's go to our next slide here. We're going to look at the sectors. Yes. So now we've got the makeup of the agricultural sector, yeah? Crops, livestock, forestry, and fishing. And essentially the same story, quarterly performance, and then annual performance, of course. Now, this is, of course, quarterly 2018, 2019, that's Q4 20, and then annually 2016, which was the ugly period, the recession, going through to 2019. So how are you seeing with the performance of the different sectors? It's not very impressive. I mean, we're just like barely touching 3% for a couple of these, and some are just under 2%.
Yeah, so if you kind of notice, crop production kind of mirrors what we saw in the sector as a whole, right? And that's because crop production is the majority, or comprises or contributes the most to that sector, right? So we can see here that it basically mirrors what the agriculture sector is doing. So although we've seen pretty much steady growth in fishing, it just accounts for too little of our production in total.
Right.
So the crop production story, I think, is very similar to what's happening in the sector as a whole. It's been growing. It grew Q3, Q4, but this growth is still kind of lackluster compared to what it was doing before.
Right.
So it's a mixed bag, right? It's good in terms of the last 2 quarters, but in terms of the bigger picture, we're still underperforming what we should be doing.
But, I notice no one really talks about forestry much. Most of the focus is crop production and, I guess, fishing. Forestry doesn't really come up. You think the whole climate change talk with where we need to be, preserving the environment and so on and so forth, you think that's going to affect forestry down the line? Or are we even going to listen to anybody that tells us to conserve these? As far as that's concerned. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think Nigeria's stance, and pretty much the stance of most developing countries, is
don't bring that climate change.
That climate change is not what we're focusing on right now. We're just trying to ramp up growth. So, yeah, I'm not too sure about that for now.
That coming up. All right. Okay, so again, tepid. The story is tepid. It's still tepid growth.
It's still tepid growth.
It's still not where it needs to be. Okay, let's look at our next slide. There we go.
Telco.
In fact, it was supposed to actually, I think it should be ICT before telco. Well, no, we can actually touch on, let's touch on this now. This is, I mean, double-digit growth, huh?
Yeah.
Quarterly, and then even on the annual side, this is. I've mentioned that this is one of our top performance. Yes.
Yes, definitely. I think so. So this space has pretty much been consistent in the last 2 years. Last year we saw astronomical growth, 15%, 16%, as you can see, in Q4 18. But that base was pretty high. So on a year-on-year basis, we've seen a bit of moderation. But still, telco contributes about 10% to our GDP. And like you said, double-digit growth is one of the best performing sectors in the economy right now. And with the subscription growth really robust, we don't expect that to slow down drastically in the next year. So we forecast growth of about 9% next year by full year. So yeah, telco is one of the bright spots. It's one of the sectors in the economy which is not underperforming as much as the other sectors.
Right.
So we like telcos right now.
And Michael, again and again, I talk about what happened in 2000 when the government liberalized the sector. They got rid of Nitel. They gave the licenses out to all the players, and then call centers, tech centers where you can get your phones fixed, accessories where you can buy screens. I mean, there's just this is for me is the model for everywhere else, right? As far as the whole privatization is concerned and opening up the sectors, it's still a catch-up. I want to get your thoughts on one thing, though. Dr. Pantami, the Minister of Digital Economy, ICT, there's some language for me recently that says that we might be capping the number of lines that each Nigerian can have. You think that might have an effect? I think Q4, we added about 5 or 6 point something million new lines in the fourth quarter of the year for telco. Do you think might affect growth if Nigerians can get as multiple lines because of security issues, SIM cards and stuff like that? You think that might be an effect?
Yeah, so I think he said, that he wants to cap it to about 3 lines per person maximum.
What if I want 5 or 6 lines?
So it should have an impact in terms of how much people are paying. But I think really I don't expect a huge impact because, if you want 4 or 5 lines, the chances are you're not going to make less calls because you don't have those lines. You'll just make those calls on the lines you do have.
Your primary lines.
I think in terms of the time you spend and the amount you spend on data and on calls, I don't expect that to change drastically because of that. I'm still pretty bullish on the telco sector going forward.
Okay, cool. Let's see if we have another slide here. I think, ICT. But still, the bulk of this is what we just discussed.
Exactly.
Right? Which is telco.
Spot on. So the bulk of ICT is telecoms. Telecoms contributes over about 90% of the entire ICT sector. So basically, all that we just discussed kind of applies here. So if you look at the results or the GDP figures in general, so we grew by 2.55%. And I think we've just gone through a few of the sectors that did really well: the ICT sector, the agricultural sector.
Yes.
And the manufacturing sector as well did pretty well, right? It grew 2.4%. It grew 1.2%, right, compared to 1.1 in the last quarter. And that sector, I think, similar to the case for the agriculture sector, it's kind of benefited a lot from the border closures. Right. We've seen a lot more import substitution. We've seen the likes of some big players, Dangote, coming out to say that he's going to have his rice factory completed this year, and we expect a lot more production. So in that space, I think we're seeing a lot more positive, outcome from recent policies that the government has put out. But not all sectors are benefiting from that.
Right.
So the trade sector, for example, right? So for trade, we've seen consecutive contractions in that sector. Recently, it contracted once again, and so I would think this is mainly because of how trade is kind of calculated, right? So you calculate trade looking at how much reselling is going on from the imports or from the from the source of the goods. And when you look at the border closures, that's less goods coming in from the land
for them to resell,
borders, and that's less for them to resell. So I think that's kind of impacted negatively on our trade GDP. And trade GDP is actually 15% of the entire GDP,
so that's
it's quite significant.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is that non-oil growth is still being overwhelmingly supported by the other sectors that we've mentioned. Agriculture, which is about 25%, manufacturing, which is about 10%, and the ICT sector and the telco sector, which is about 10 as well.
Okay, a couple of the players that I think you take a look at, that being Okomo and Prescott, I think they've players like that who've complained about how smuggled goods, even Dangote sugar, right? Even players like that have complained about how goods that have been smuggled in have affected their margins. One would say that they've benefited from the border. I mean, I will ask you as the analyst, but border closure has, they've benefited from that. What do you think?
I think definitely they have benefited from that. A lot of smuggling has been pushing their prices downwards for a while, and also affecting the amount of volumes that they can push out to their customers, right?
Yeah.
And so with stricter border enforcement, what we've seen is, I think they're getting a lot more demand from the local guys. And also in terms of prices, their prices are much more favorable for their margins. And I think also they've also received support in terms of global prices. So global CPO prices rallied towards the end of last year, and that normally trickles down to the local price as well. So we've seen them kind of benefit from that. But the recent coronavirus outbreak is kind of slowing that momentum, right? We've seen not just crude oil prices or the edible oils in general, but almost all commodities across the board are basically suffering. Nigeria right now, our oil price is $57 per barrel. It's affecting our budget implementation and etc., right?
Okay. Would you say that the coronavirus is the black swan event of 2020? I mean, it's only February, still very early, but with the way markets have been reacting, would you say it is because I wouldn't think we'd have another black swan event. We've got about a minute, but what do you think? Is it the black swan event of 2020?
I think it's something that no one saw coming.
Which is the very definition of a black swan.
Yeah, exactly. And it is literally, if you look at the global markets last week, they were all negatively affected by this virus. And I think the concerning thing is it spread so quickly, and right now there is still no strong evidence that is going to moderate
anytime soon.
Yeah.
Michael Nwakalor of Cardinal Stone, thank you so much for joining us, giving us insights on GDP and other global matters.